All right, welcome to our video on kidney stones. We're going to break this video, as we will most of our videos, into a few different sections. First, we're going to take a look at the topic overall, the condition overall, and we're going to talk about some of the actions we might choose for this particular condition. Then we're going to take a look at the formula itself, talking about why we choose the herbs. And then the third section, which you can look at in advance or you can look at in order, is going to be some of the featured herbs. And what you can see here, if we get into our herbs section already, is we've got several herbs that are here, but we're really only going to focus on the ones that are bolded. It doesn't mean that there aren't other herbs that are going to be very useful, but these are the ones that we're going to look at in particular because of the ones that specifically we're going to see highlighted in this section. So let's get right into our video here. We're going to look at kidney stones, of course, and as we often will, we'll see a typical case presentation. And these won't be complicated. Usually they'll be fairly uncomplicated. We've got a 40-year-old male, sudden onset extreme pain, unilateral radiating, really your classic kidney stones. I'm going to assume you know what kidney stones are. Pain is pretty significant in this case because almost always the pain of kidney stones is very extreme, and we can get a lot of radiating, and often we're treating the pain, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about our herbs specifically, but this is something that you want to make sure is part of your treatment. We'll talk about that in a minute with the actions and what you want to do. To what degree, really, do you want your main formula to be analgesic? And that's really interesting because you're going to say, do I want my main formula to be analgesic at all? Or do I want to make my main formula mostly vulnerary or to some degree demulcent? We'll talk about that. Or do you want to simply get through the pain? We'll get into pain, and that's why, if you noted over here, the first herb, although these are in alphabetical order, that was actually on our featured herbs in this section is indeed cannabis, obviously for its analgesic properties in this case. Okay, so not too much to get into with the rest of our section here. We're going to look down, as we will with all of these, into couple different sections. Outcome measures. Yep, these are always going to be pretty straightforward, and we're going to want to reduce acute pain, ease the passing of stones, prevent infection, and reduce likelihood of recurrence. Now, this is a really tricky one because what does that even mean? Well, actually, that's not true. It's obvious what it means. You don't want kidney stones to come back, but does that mean giving someone a preventative formula forever? And I think the answer to that is probably no. Because how do we know that really keeps them away? We don't know that if someone has kidney stones once, it doesn't mean they're going to have them again and again, but we do know some people will repeat, and in those cases, we don't always know why. But in a lot of ways, kidney stones, and some people tend to be stone formers, kidney stones are kind of simple chemistry in terms of, if you remember grade 11 chemistry, you've kind of got one set of the equation on one side, the other on the other, and you've got that arrow, that two-way arrow in between. And we know when the arrow points towards precipitate, we get kidney stones. So are kidney stones preventable? Are they treatable? Can we shrink kidney stones? Those are difficult questions to answer, but we know that if we can favor a terrain, if we can favor an environment where we decrease the likelihood of precipitate, then we know we're going to see at least some benefit. A question I always like to answer in these cases is, how common is it? Two questions. So how common is it, and how good are we at treating it? The question is, as to how common, fairly common. I don't know if I can give you specific stats on that. How good are we at treating this with herbs? We're okay. And this again is going to get us into our main differentiation here. Do we mostly treat it as kidney stones, resolve kidney stones, or are we looking at pain relief? How well can we do? How much good can we do with pain relief? Depends how intense you want to get. We're going to talk about that. How good are we at preventing stones? That's a lifestyle thing. How good are we at lifestyle things? We're excellent. So the answer to that is probably similar to a lot of things. Can we change the terrain? Can we change someone's internal environment overall so that it no longer favors stone formation? And this is interesting and important to look at when looking at the overview of the condition, because that largely determines how successful we'll be at it, and in terms of our botanicals, it largely determines what we're going to choose for action. So let's get into some of that now. We can see here, most of these aren't going to be too complicated. Demulcent, sure. How much can we really have an effect as a demulcent in the urinary system? Some say a lot, some say not much at all. Zea mays tends to be held out, and it is a herb that I like, as a primary demulcent for kidney stones. However, I think its best action is actually as a vulnerary. And this we know because it contains allantoin. And we're going to look at this as one of our featured herbs, of course. You will remember that allantoin is also in a popular herb called comfrey. We don't use comfrey internally very often because of its pyrrolizidine alkaloids and its potential for hepatotoxicity. However, Zea mays has some allantoin. I think it's about a third as much, so quite a bit less, but still some. And this we use as a vulnerary. It seems to be, we don't know for sure on this one, it seems to be excreted renally in a way that suggests some of that vulnerary property moves through the ureters and may help some healing action of the stones as they pass. That's the hope. That's what makes it one of our marquee herbs for this section. It's probably the only herb that has a real vulnerary action there, but you could use comfrey internally if you wanted, although of course we often don't, but you could consider it. Diuretic. Now here's an interesting one because often we've already got urinary frequency and sometimes that is painful. I, however, really like the diuretic action, and we're going to see a couple of herbs that are particularly good for this. I really like nettle leaf. I think this is my favorite diuretic overall. When I do want a diuretic action, this is the one that I use. Some people also use the seed here. I haven't worked with it as much. I don't know that it's a lot better, but I do find there is a difference between early season nettle and late season nettle. Late season nettle does often include the seed. So I do like that as a diuretic. Now, if you only have, or you don't really even know what part of the season your nettle's from, not a big deal. It will still act as a diuretic. It seems to act as a non-dehydrating diuretic. What does that even mean? How does that even work? It's a little, I don't know if it's complicated. I don't really even know the answer to that. But unlike something like caffeine, for example, which does leave someone parched and dry, nettle does seem to have still a very strong diuretic effect, but more gentle. It doesn't give that dehydration. So I do like that in cases of kidney stones, and I do really like the diuretic action in cases of kidney stones. I would say often I personally favor these two as my main actions where treating kidney stones, especially if the kidney stones are acute. Antispasmodic, I would say this is going to fall in really to some degree with our analgesic and our sedative actions. Nervine, sure, but at this point you don't really need to calm. You probably do need to sedate and you want to get a little stronger action there. Nervine, a little bit of an action. Antimicrobial, I think, is important. Why? We want to prevent an infection. How likely are kidney stones to turn into an infection? Well, it's something you want to take care of because of the severity of the outcomes there. So do I always include some antimicrobial action? Yes, I do. Solidago, I find, gets this one just about right. And you'll see this is in the formula that we've chosen for today. So Solidago is one that I like here. I don't believe it's on our list, but sage, if you want to go stronger, and if you really want to go strong, you go with juniper. But what's the problem with juniper? Juniper irritates the kidneys. It's part of how it works. And that may actually, I don't think it'll worsen the stones, but it may be a little bit injurious to kidneys that are already struggling. Maybe? Hard to say. But sage would be my choice if you wanted to add a stronger antimicrobial action. Okay, let's move down now and take a look at some of the other bits of our action. So we've got a bunch of other herbs here, of course. Now I've mentioned the key ones that I like, but we include these charts here because there are certainly other herbs to highlight. Corn silk. I like licorice root. How demulcent is licorice root as something that makes it down through the ureters, excreted by the kidneys? I don't really know. I don't think anyone actually knows the answer to that, but I still like it. I still include it, and you'll see it in our formula today. I still include it in most of the formulas that I use here. Vulneraries. Corn silk's my favorite. I'm not so sure how vulnerary horsetail is, but you'll see it in a lot of traditional formulas. And this one, Gotu kola, probably is quite good. The research is starting to pile up, suggesting it's a reasonably good topical vulnerary, and we're starting to use it more and more as such. It's a bit of an adaptogen as well, which I like, and I'm starting to experiment putting it into some of my kidney stone formulas. Diuretic, you've got quite a few choices here. I've mentioned already that nettle leaf is my favorite. Dandelion leaf, probably just as good. I don't have a great answer as to why I don't use more dandelion leaf. It's certainly diuretic. I just favor nettle leaf, but I think it's probably an equally good choice. An interesting herb that you will not see used today is gravel root. Gravel root has a history of use for kidney stones. It also has a history of use for gallstones or anywhere where there are stones. Is it useful? I don't know. There's almost no research to suggest it's useful, but the traditional use certainly persists. Is it a matter of, is it effective, or is it just simply being passed down as a herb to use? I've more or less, in personal opinion here, stopped using it in favor of increasing the amount of the other herbs that I use. However, you'll certainly still use it, and it is worth mentioning. Maybe we'll find there is something more to it. Antispasmodic. Couple of choices here. Probably the best one, or the ones you'll see most commonly used, are cramp bark. That one's used anytime, as the name implies, where there's cramping. I like valerian because it's going to double down as a pretty good antispasmodic, but also as a sedative and provide some extra pain relief. Lymphatic, I don't know about lymphatics so much in their action here, but another herb that has good traditional use here is hydrangea. Hydrangea, as they say traditionally, and that's often, well, it's not the way we remember it, but that's often what it's used for. It's to some degree a diuretic as well. It seems to be quite useful. I think less so in kidney stones and more where we have what used to be called pelvic congestion. So we would think of that in cases like BPH or where the urine starts to get a little bit cloudy, a little bit turbid. I do use hydrangea in some of those cases. It shows up in traditional use for generally as a lymphatic, but that's almost because we don't know where else to class it. In terms of kidney stones, personally I don't really use it very often in kidney stones. Agrimony probably has some benefit as diuretic in this case, but I don't really use it too often here. And now really in this sedative category, we've got a lot of our fairly heavy hitters in terms of herbs we use as sedatives. Valerian, Jamaican dogwood, passiflora a little lighter, and then California poppy. You could use all of these together if you wanted. The one that's not in here, of course, is cannabis. That's really another large step up in terms of its analgesic action. If you wanted to, you could use these. We've got it down here in our analgesic section. You see a lot of the same herbs together here. Now that's an overview and looking into some of the actions. Let's actually move down in our notes and we're going to take a look at the TCM integration. As we'll see in a lot of these videos, we're going to talk about, I don't know about all of them, but some TCM integration. Why do we do that? I find it's useful in helping to understand the case. It gives us another perspective to look at, okay, well, how else might I treat this? How else might I understand what's happening in this case? So kidney stones are obviously a condition of substance and considered phlegm forming. This is quite significant in that it's a condition of substance. As we've seen again and again, conditions of substance, so something that's moved from the chi level to the blood level or condensed into something that has a form we can find and see, they're much harder to treat. And that's where we say, TCM says, just like naturopathic medicine, prevention really is the best medicine, and the way to approach something is to prevent it from happening in the first place. So when we have conditions of substance, when we have something that already has form, it's a lot more work to try to make that arrow go the other way. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's less so. So in these cases of kidney stones, it's excess or deficient heat. Usually it's heat, it doesn't have to be, but usually it's heat that forms the kidney stones. I liked this phrase, steams and brews. We say the same thing with gallstones. Heat steams and brews fluids into phlegm. It's like reducing something on the stove top. And we see this with gallstones, we see this with kidney stones, we see this with blood stasis in general. The treatment principle then is to, in this case, we want to really nourish the kidneys. Restore the fluids is probably the best way to say it. Clear heat wherever you need to clear heat, or wherever there's heat that you can find to clear. You can have cold pattern kidney stones. And that's where we see coming next those caused by deficiency: cold pattern, congealing. So the two ways that we get substance, well, a couple of ways, but the two of the main ways we get substance is heat, steaming and brewing, reducing and concentrating, or we get cold, congealing into substance, into form. In these cases, of course, you want to tone the kidney, qi, and yang. It will not be difficult to tell these two things apart. Okay, we're going to wrap up our video 1 there, condition overview, some of the actions, and in our next video, we're going to look at building the formula and understanding the herbs for this section.